Reserve Bank of India Governor Shaktikanta has raised the issue of methods of loan recovery being used by certain lenders, calling these harsh methods which some unscrupulous recovery agents are deploying. The governor also said that the central bank will now issue guidelines to make digital lending ecosystem safe and sound. He mentioned how certain regulated as well as unregulated entities use unacceptable methods and there needs to be checks and balances put in place. Several complaints have been received where agents called customers at odd hours, used foul language, and in many cases, as we will show you through our graphics, certain borrowers have even resorted to the extreme step of committing suicide. The governor stressed that this kind of abusive practice, in fact, must be reined in, and the RBI will therefore be issuing new guidelines for greater compliance. Now, why we are bringing this up is because the matter has really taken serious proportions. NCRB data show that as many as 11,716 businessmen died by suicide in 2020 compared to 10,677 farmers in the same year, which means that there have been more suicide of businessmen in that same year than farmers. During the pandemic and the resultant lockdown, small businesses and traders have suffered heavily, with many being forced to down shutters or on their default on loans. So there is a clear message now coming from the RBI boss that abusive agents need to be reined in. The idea is to create a healthy lender-borrower ecosystem. The governor has taken up the cudgels for the citizens. So is there a flawed system that needs course correction? To discuss this with me here this evening, joining me here on Mirror Now is Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg, former Finance Secretary of India, and Jay Ahluwalia, who's the proprietor of First Capital Finance. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Very good evening. I'll come to you for questions, but let me first play out for our viewers what the RBI governor said and some citizen voices first.
Another area which is engaging, and it is engaging our serious attention, is the harsh recovery methods used by certain lenders without having adequate checks and controls over their recovery agents. We have received complaints of customers being contacted by recovery agents at odd hours, even past midnight. There are also complaints of recovery agents using foul language. Now, such kind of actions by recovery agents are unacceptable and pose reputational risk for the financial entities themselves. And this is something which we find to a large extent in unregulated entities and also to some extent in the regulated entities of the RBI. The RBI will sort of address this issue very seriously in all its seriousness so far as our supervised and regulated entities are concerned. With regard to the others, when we get complaints, we of course pass it on to the law enforcement authorities to take the necessary action in that regard.
आदमी को कहा ना बिजनेस है ना कुछ है, और उसमें ये नया प्रेशराइज करना, माने ये लोगों का आके ऐसे प्रेशराइज करेंगे तो आदमी जाएगा तो जाएगा कहाँ? ऑलरेडी आदमी ऐसा इतना नुकसान में चल रहा है, ना बिजनेस है ना कुछ है ना कुछ, तो आदमी यही सोचता है कि भाई मैं कैसे भी करके ये सब चीजों से हटूं, बट वो हटने के लिए उसके लिए ऑप्शन तो चाहिए।
तो उनके लिए लोग घर पे रिकवरी के लिए अचानक घुस जाते हैं, इससे लोगों के दिमाग पे प्रेशर बनता है। तो ऐसा बिल्कुल भी नहीं होना चाहिए। आरबीआई के जिसने भी ये कानून निकाला है कि ऐसा टोटली घर पे आके एक करना रिकवरी के लिए अच्छी बात नहीं है। इसे
ऑब्वियसली जो तरीका है उनका, सबसे पहली चीज़ है कि वो सही होना चाहिए। ठीक है, उन्होंने अगर लोन लिया है, इट्स ऑल राइट। कुछ इश्यूज होंगे, कुछ गलत शायद से लेट हुआ होगा आप ये करने में, ड्यू करने में, लेकिन जहाँ तक मेरा मानना है कि उसका भी एक अपना एटिकेट्स होता है, कुछ तरीका होता है, उस तरीके से उसको फॉलो अप करना चाहिए।
Mr. Subhash Garg, recovery agents employed by financial institutions do not always use legitimate means to recover money. That seems to be the message that has come from the top boss of the RBI. As we understand, there are already regulations in place. There are existing rules. So what is the issue here? Are they not stringent enough, or are they not being complied with? Is the policing not strong enough to ensure compliance, Mr. Garg?
See, the basic problem is that a lot of people take loans which they are not in a position to service later, and they default. They should not have taken some loan which they couldn't have been, could not have serviced in the first place, but that's a different point. If they have taken loan and they have defaulted, now the options before the lender is they would like to recover their land, their loans, but they cannot resort to the means which are not permitted by the law. For example, you can't sort of detain people, get into their homes, disturb them, cause them mental harassment, extort from them in any way. These are unlawful methods. But what happens is that the line between what is legitimate and what is illegitimate becomes little gray most of the times, many times. And here, what governor was also saying that he or RBI can regulate. The regulated entities can define for them. If they do it, they can be penalized. Their service standards can be defined, but if they go beyond that, they can be penalized and taken action upon, including, if necessary, delicensing them. But there is a whole lot of unregulated entities. They are not, and that is where my sense is that the Reserve Bank will not be able to do much for them. And
Okay.
governor was also saying that they refer the matter to the state governments and all. And there is no good practice. There is no best practice which have been developed. Very clearly, you can't allow these extra legal means for achieving their recovery targets.
Okay, so that's a very important point. Mr. Ahluwalia, as somebody who is actively involved in the business of lending, first of all, let me just ask you head on, is it true that unscrupulous methods are used by recovery agents? It is driving people to suicide.
Good evening, Frida. Thank you for having me on your show. See, at the outset, anecdotal evidence suggests that the world over, recovery agents are perceived as a goon and as a bully. So, having said that, if an incident happens wherein a delinquent borrower complains of excesses by the recovery agent, the agent's version of the incident is not going to be believed, right? So from there, the problem starts. And there has been in existence a grievance redressal portal of the RBI where people can complain, and they have been complaining. And these complaints have been growing exponentially.
Yes.
That can also be explained by the fact, and you will bear me out on this, that in the last few years, there has been this huge revolution of digital lending. A profusion of fintech companies have come and started lending on digital platforms, whereby consumer has benefited. 5-minute loans, these have become a reality now. You walk into a mall and you select a 54-inch LED tree TV. By the time the salesman packs it for you, your loan is approved and disbursed. So there has been this profusion of retail lending, consumer lending, which has helped build consumerism in the economy too.
Yes.
So when you get the loan, you're very happy, you've got what you wanted. But when it comes to paying back the loan, if you are going to turn delinquent, what means does the lender have to enforce remedial management? By the very nature of retail loans, the number of borrowers is so large that fintech companies or finance companies need to employ recovery agents, because the single ticket size of a loan is small. it's not feasible.
But should they be heckling? Should they be abusing? Should they be using foul language? There are instances where recovery agents have called up friends of the borrowers. I mean, there's the whole harassment plan, it seems, which is activated the moment there's a delay. Is that a correct assessment?
So many times, most times actually what happens is when a loan turns delinquent, the first thing that the delinquent borrower does is begin to evade the finance company, then the recovery agent. So after prolonged follow-up and prolonged, chasing, the agent manages to reach the delinquent borrower. At some times it may happen that there is some reactionary behavior by the recovery agent, which then sometimes blows a little out of proportion. And I'm not defending that. I'm not here to defend those incidents at all.
Yes.
It's the nature of the business. Sometimes such things may happen. A defaulter is a defaulter, and he, if a shield is provided to him,
Yes.
for him to hide behind his, and thereby justify his delinquent behavior, that then vitiates the whole lending atmosphere.
Yes.
And,
so that's a fair point. There has to be a balance. And of course, the idea is not to completely demonize the recovery agents or demonize the lending agencies. Like Mr. Ahluwalia is arguing, this is also an important service being provided. Mr. Subhash Garg, how do we then set the balance in place that on one hand you need this kind of financing services to help consumerism? It's important for the economy, yet we do not want to see this reaching a level where people have to commit suicide for not being able to repay a loan.
See, this is a very delicate issue. Lending is definitely needed. Digital lending is making the loans reach faster. This BNPL and many other methods which have come up makes the loan very quickly available to the people, which they can use for meeting their needs. It's also true, and whatever complaints you aired before this show, none of them seem to be saying that they did not take loan. So it's not a case of false pursuance of the recovery. And therefore, this is very, very legitimate expectation that loan will be repaid and the lender will be able to recover. Now, I think that is where the delicacy is, that how do you bring in these civilized methods of recovery? And take another thing here, there is much, something makes the issue much more complicated, is that most of these retail loans are for movables, and they're not backed by collateral. And therefore, the agents or the lender cannot recover the collateral and money from that. Yes. And therefore, I think the recoveries will have to be made by reaching to the person of the concerned. And there might also be some cases where somebody is deliberately trying to avoid servicing the loan despite having the means. We don't know. These exact cases are not available. So therefore, this is a very delicate situation. But I don't think any of these things justify using these strong arm tactics or using indecent tactics for recovering. And that is what the law doesn't permit. It's a real live human issue. And I think by better training the recovery agents, by defining the law and making the law enforcement agents.
Which is why, Mr. Garg, the regulatory framework must be clear, must be transparent, must be something that is sustainable from both ends. And I like the way, this is a very balanced view, Mr. Subhash Garg, that you presented, and fair enough, points well taken. Thank you so much for joining us, both Mr. Subhash Garg and Mr. Jay Ahluwalia, for sharing your views with us. The idea is to create a healthy borrowing lending system. And like we just heard, there's been a proliferation of digital lending. This is the new reality. And therefore, this now requires greater attention when it comes to protecting both the consumer and both the borrower and the lender to be fair. Let's leave it at that. Thanks for watching.